questions.
Well, I got to admit, that was not very enlightening. Mike Hatch wants to admire the problem, but he won't. I didn't hear what he's going to do. And I think Tim Pawlenty spent his whole time telling us that Mike Hatch didn't answer the question in order to not answer the question. The question was, what's the future? You can't duck the question. You can't duck the question. During this last 4 years, the condition of our roads went down, below the DOT's own goal, and it's still below the DOT's own goal. You don't need the DOT to tell you that. Drive around a little bit. You can't duck the question. What's the plan? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? One of the things I've been privileged to do in my work is to work with highway departments and transportation departments around the country. I spent a little time out east, New York State, New Jersey. These are where we're headed. These are people who started borrowing only instead of doing the right thing. And now in the state of New York, I think I got this about right, half of every cent that comes in the gas tax is being used to pay debt service. They can't fix the roads. And in New Jersey, I think it's 100%. They can't fix the roads. We're on a path to disaster with respect to our highway systems. And we do not have a secure source of revenue for transit, which is why every transit project is a one-off, one at a time. We have to start from scratch. If we want to encourage transit use in this area and in the rest of the state, we've got to give people some sense of where the heck the lines are going to be and when they're going to be there, so that developers and homeowners and businesses can make those choices. And then you got to ask yourself, what is the crosstown? It is nothing more than the most bungled project in the history of Minnesota. And if we believed in accountability in this state, we would fire the Commissioner of Transportation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please. We'll go back to Mr. Hatch. Just in case my question was confusing, I will repeat a little bit of it. Is more funding needed? How much? Where would you get it? How would you spend it?
For 2007, I believe that the current projected revenue is about $450 million. I believe that we owe, I think we have to start paying back on the money that was borrowed during this term to the tune of about $50 million. The estimates from DOT is anywhere from $1 billion to $1.5 billion. I think the reality is probably going to be $800 million to $1 billion is a likely maintenance standard for the state. But as I said before, I am not going to be talking about revenue increases until I develop the trust of this state and a whole state with regard to what we're going to do with it. Right now we've become very metrocentric. I can't tell you whether it be increased property taxes in greater Minnesota, or whether it be taking $100 million out of the Rural Highway Fund and using it in the metropolitan area. There's a great deal of resentment there. And you can't build trust with this state if you're going to play people off one against the other.
Thank you. Governor, would you like the question repeated?
I think I got it. I'm certainly not trying to duck the answer. I just ran out of time knowing we had another 2 minutes to address it here in phase 2. But first of all, we have facts here. You know, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And they're important facts to put on the table and remember. And first of all, we have a need for more revenue. Doug Tice, to answer the question, of course we need more revenue. One big opportunity we have is this November in what's called the MVEST dedication. When you buy a car, new or used, you pay a tax that's existing. Goes half into the road account, half into the general fund. Now, if we vote yes on this thing, which I encourage everybody to do, all the money goes into the transportation account, and it's already accounted for in our budget forecast, and we're running ahead of forecast. Big time. So this is an easy addition of $300 million upon full implementation. That will help a lot. You can spend it as cash, or you can leverage some of it for bonding. As to bonding, you know, if you're running a business and somebody comes to you and says your cost of these future construction projects are going up 12% a year, and you can leverage money today for 5% a year, most business people would say, you know, that's a good deal, especially if I can depreciate or utilize the project over 20 years or plus. You know, we bond for things that last a couple of decades, and we pay for them. And when you can avoid 12% a year construction costs with 5% money, it's a good deal. And one of the ways we're paying for the current projects is we squeezed MnDOT, and it needed to be squeezed. It was a lethargic agency. And as to this argument about the rural highway account and rural versus metro, that is not true. As with every other year, there have been times when we have a big project where we borrow against various accounts and it gets paid back and none of the rural projects got delayed. And as to the International Falls project, one congressman with a lot of seniority said he wanted a project done and he earmarked it in Congress. It was way down the Minnesota list. So is it fair to say we're going to take that earmark from Congress and catapult over all the other projects on the priority list that's developed by the engineers on a need or priority basis? So there are basic facts here, and you don't get to just make them up. You don't get to exaggerate. You got to be held to account for that.
Thank you. One further minute on the topic, Mr. Hutchinson.
So let me summarize briefly. Mike Hatch wants to build trust, but doesn't trust us to tell us where the revenue is going to come from. The governor wants us to believe that the dedication of the MVES will do the job. It'll do about 1/5 of the job. And the thing he's asking us to vote on, he could have done last year, and the legislature could have done last year, or the year before, or the year before that, or the year before that, or last decade. We don't need to amend the Constitution to make this dedication. We just have leaders with a little courage to get the job done. And as to borrowing, boy, I tell you, I've lived in and out in debt in my life, and the one thing I know about debt is you don't take it on if you don't know where the revenue is going to come from to pay it back. And when he uses words like squeeze MnDOT down, that's code for potholes. That's where they came from. You can't duck these problems. You can't. This is the thing about highway infrastructure. It just deteriorates in front of you. You can't duck the problems. This is, frankly, a problem produced by this administration, and it ought to be fixed by the next one.
Thank you. Attorney General.
Let me give you, I do support the MVEST amendment. I don't like the wording of it, I'll be candid, but I do support it. The problem I have with the wording is something that goes on in greater Minnesota. It says not more than 60% going to transportation and not less than 40% going, or highways, not less than 40% going to transit. Many people in greater Minnesota look at that and says, aha, that could mean 100% goes to transit. The issue, I was addressing the MVEST. I do support the MVEST amendment. But this is another example where you raised the question of trust with greater Minnesota. The amendment essentially says that at least 60% of the money will go to highway, excuse me, not more than 60% goes to highways, not less than 60%, not at least 40% goes to transit, not more than 60% goes to highways. You could read that all 100% goes to mass transit. If you're in greater Minnesota, you read that amendment, you get some qualms about that. I've made a pledge that if this is passed as governor, I want 60%, the maximum going to highway construction. But again, once again, if you're going to talk about revenue, you're going to have to build trust with this entire state. The idea of playing in a metrocentric world doesn't work in the long run.
Thank you. Monty.
Just a couple of additional thoughts. First, on the crosstown, it's been delayed for 20 years. Instead of doing it this summer, we're going to do it next spring. There was some delay in the federal funding. It is going to get done. It's going to get done on my watch. So the idea that it was delayed has been delayed for 2 decades. Second of all, most other states borrow, at least for a portion of their transportation needs, with bonding for the reasons I described earlier. It's not some radical Republican or Democratic idea. It is well accepted across the country on a bipartisan basis. Third, the bill that I proposed to the legislature in 2006 got more votes than the 2005 bill that I vetoed. And lastly, in terms of additional revenues, I want to move the state really aggressively towards E85, hybrid vehicles, electric cars, hydrogen cars, and to hook our future for transportation funding to a source that I know and hope will be declining, because we're going to move away from gasoline and fossil fuel in the next 10 or 15 years, is not a very forward-looking perspective. So we have to start thinking about another way to charge for driving instead of the gas tax, and that's the discussion we're having, but I'm getting the stop sign, so I'll have to wait for another opportunity.